All right, everyone, and that was a story from our Fox 4 Dallas team. I appreciate them filing that report for us. We are joined now by Joe Thompson. He is a former NYPD officer. Joe, thank you so much for being here with us.
Good morning, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So this is the outcome that, honestly, we were expecting, correct?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that we were expecting this. This was pretty inevitable.
Of course. So what were your thoughts as you were hearing that the school board did say unanimously that they were firing him? Does it seem as though they were sending a message by unanimously doing it?
Well, absolutely. I think they were under tremendous pressure from the community. You saw there in your clip some of the parents, some of the statements that were made. It's kind of hard to watch. You know, they had no choice but to make some changes, and that's the first change that they needed to make, and you know, it was the right choice.
Do you think at this point that more firings are coming? This, as you mentioned, is just the first one. Could it be a line of firings again to send a message?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I think that the scope of this investigation is going to be very broad. I believe that the congressional committee did their own investigation, but there's going to have to be a very broad law enforcement investigation of this, where they're going to have to speak to everybody. They're going to have to speak to all the officers that were on the scene. They're going to have to speak, get witness statements from everybody, listen to the 911 calls again, listen to the radio transmissions. The bottom line is they need to know what happened here in order to be able to fix it. You know, we all want to say it's Pete Arredondo, lack of leadership, and I totally agree from what I've seen so far. You need an investigation to be able to come in to say, well, what did Pete Arredondo tell these other officers? What did he know? What was he told? Did the 911 calls that were coming from the classroom get to him? Did they reach any of the officers? And the only way to do that is to do a very broad investigation and speak to everybody that was on that scene that day. And you got to start at the beginning, from the moment that the first calls came in. You have to look at the 911 calls that came in, what was stated. I mean, the scope of this investigation is going to be broad, and I'm sure you're going to see a lot more coming down the pike with this. And I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing criminal charges filed. I know Texas does have a statute of endangering a child and abandoning a child. That is something that law enforcement is, you know, privy to as well, and they're not. You know, that's something that could be used against them.
And you've worked in schools. As this was all unfolding here, did you think it would take 3 months for this firing to happen? Does it seem like that's too long, not enough time, in your opinion?
Well, whenever you're talking about a firing, I don't know how it works there, if they have a union or whatever, but there are policies and procedures that take place in order. You can't just turn around and say you're fired and that's it in most cases. That particular agency, I'm not certain how they operate or if there's a union or something involved, but usually it seems that way. Maybe there was a union involved, and they do take, you know, quite a bit of time in order to be able to go and fire somebody. Again, you know, you don't really have a full, thorough investigation yet. I mean, you do have the congressional one. I don't know. I guess they probably based their findings off of that, but there has not been an actual law enforcement investigation done on this particular case. Usually, that's what most people will pivot off of and use that. For firings, for criminal charges. The DA will use that also to convene a grand jury if necessary. So yeah, these things can take a long time, and I know it's frustrating to all the parents out there. I completely understand. But you know, at least the right thing was done at this particular time, and now it's time to regroup and learn from this tragedy.
And many people, including us, did read that report that initially came out. It was dozens of pages. As someone who did work in schools, what, I guess, stood out to you as you were reading that report?
There was numerous things that stood out to me. The first thing that really kind of is obvious is there really should be some sort of a law. And I'm not even talking about Texas. I'm talking about this throughout this entire country. We need to have a law enforcement officer stationed at every school. This kind of stuff is happening way too often. It's happening, you know, way more than anybody would have ever imagined. We need to have somebody there to protect these children. That's number one. We need to have law enforcement in every school. This particular school, Robb Elementary, they didn't have somebody stationed there. They had a roving group of guys that would just check in on the school. That's not good enough. Obviously, as you can see, this is the end result of that. there were so many different deficiencies in that school with closed doors and doors that were doors that were unlocked and left open. The main point of entry at that school, there was 3 doors that were people were able to come in and leave from. You know, that should be only down to one entrance and one egress in the school. Walking through the hallways and checking door handles and really working with your students and your staff on these types of incidents. You have to take these things very seriously. My particular example of working in a school, you know, I had to retrain the students and the staff in my school because they had some bad, you know, examples of training lessons prior to me getting there. You know, you got to teach these students what to do. The staff needs to know what to do, and they have to train as if it's the real thing every single time. I know it may sound a little, you know, overzealous or whatever, but, you know, you have to. These things are way too serious. They're happening in places that you can never imagine, and we have to be ready for it. You know, in my time growing up, I never heard about school shootings before. All of a sudden now in the past, you know, 15, 20 years, you know, they're happening all the time. They're not even just happening in schools. They're happening in malls and shopping centers. You know, this kind of stuff, we have to kind of get into the mentality of what can we do if this happens and prepare for it. And the first thing is to have a cop in every school and a properly trained cop, because these cops in Uvalde were not properly trained, in my eyes. I don't, you know, most agencies would probably look at that and say, well, you know, I'm not really sure what they were thinking there, but, you know, we all have to, you know, the same position when it comes to training and be able to deal with these things as they happen.
Do you think this will lead to any changes within school districts across the country? Hopefully it leads to a change in Uvalde, but do you think other districts across the country, across the state will look and say, we need to do something?
Well, I certainly hope so. Again, you know, this school was a total disaster. There was nothing there to stop this guy from coming in, or any other incident for that matter. You know, if you have a perpetrator or suspect running from the police in another instance, maybe armed with a firearm, he could have gotten into this school as well. And I would think and I would hope that other places around the country would actually look at this and use this as a training lesson. Because, you know, like in Florida here, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, that was a learning lesson for you know, most of Florida. You know, we adopted the law to have a cop in every school through that shooting. This needs to happen nationwide. Again, you know, it breaks my heart to have to keep seeing this happen, and it's really so unnecessary. And, you know, the fact that, you know, we have to keep dealing with this, you know, we have to be prepared.
Watching that video, because the surveillance video was released not too long ago, it's a pretty lengthy video itself. As someone who worked in schools, what were you thinking as you were watching that?
Well, the surveillance video of the body cams of these officers, they had no direction of what was going on in that school. And again, that's where the investigation is going to have to come in. Was Pete Arredondo telling everybody that, you know, the suspect was inside a room and there was no children there? Because then the dynamic of the whole scene changes. And that's honestly the only, looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, that would be the only justification of these officers not going in, is if there was confirmation that the shooter was in a room barricaded by himself. That's the only reason why an officer wouldn't go and confront this threat. That's where everybody kind of needs to know, needs to look at to see what exactly happened here. These officers were clearly running on no direction. They were going in, they were coming back. They really had no idea what was going on. But I wasn't there that day. I don't know who was telling them what. Pete Arredondo was the incident commander. I know he's made a statement saying he didn't know he was the incident commander. Well, he wrote the policy, so there's the first problem there. The guy was the incident commander, and now he's saying he didn't know he was in charge. Well, that, to me, that tells me, well, you know that you did something wrong. So we have to get to the bottom of this and find out exactly what was being told to these officers that made them stay back for as long as they did. Because, you know, I have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt here. I wasn't there. I don't know what was being told, what was being relayed to these guys. We have to do an investigation to figure out what happened.
And at the meeting last night, several parents were upset because Arredondo didn't show up. He released a statement and said that he didn't feel comfortable going. He didn't feel safe because they wouldn't have let him have his firearm with him. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
I think that's pretty obvious why he wasn't going to go. He probably did feel he was going to something was going to happen to him, and I'm sure he's had a lot of threats and everything to him. Also, he didn't want to be under any pressure to make any statements or say anything. And I'm sure that was given to him from his lawyer to kind of stay away from this. He's not going to make any statements at this point. There's possible criminal charges coming down the pike for him, and his lawyer is going to keep him out of the media as much as he possibly can. And you're not going to hear a peep from him until the DA decides what they're going to do here with this.
And that's my final question for you. Do you believe that criminal charges here could actually be filed against him or possibly others?
Well, I'm only surmising here based off of what I'm seeing here on the television and reading this report. But from the looks of it, yeah, I believe there may be some criminal charges coming down the line here for him. But again, I don't believe the DA is going to act based off the congressional investigation. They're going to need a full-blown law enforcement investigation that's going to cover every entity of this situation and this incident from the beginning to the end, and to find out everything that happened and what these officers knew and didn't know. And that's really what it's going to come down to. How culpable is Pete Arredondo in this particular case? Did he say things to these officers that kept these officers from going in? Yeah, that's a big problem if he did do that. So again, we're going to have to wait and see what comes down the line here for this, but I'm sure this is far from over.
All right, Joe Thompson, former NYPD officer, thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate your take on this story that, of course, will continue to develop here over the next weeks, months, maybe years.
My pleasure, Josh. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. All right, everyone, time now is 7:58 if you're joining us on the East Coast and 4:58 on the West Coast. We are going to step away for a quick 2-minute commercial break, but we will be right back with a live look at all of your top stories from across the country and across the world. Stay with us.